She slid a USB drive across the desk without saying a word. The attorney picked it up, turned it over once in his hand, and asked her what was on it. Olivia looked up, not quite at him, but close enough, and said, 214 hours. 214 hours of every phone call, every transaction, every conversation her husband believed he was having in private. The attorney set the drive down slowly. He had been practicing law in Atlanta for 22 years. He said he had never seen anything like it. What he meant was, he had never seen a legally blind woman build a case this thorough against the man who slept beside her every night for 18 years. Before we go any further, we would love to know where in the world you are watching from right now. Drop your city or state in the comments below and say hello. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let us get into this. This is the story of Olivia Reeves, a 52-year-old retired school administrator from Atlanta, Georgia, a woman who loved her husband completely, trusted him without reservation, and then lost her sight in the fall of 2023. And this is also the story of what Matthew Reeves did the moment he realized she could no longer see him. What he moved, what he hid, who he called, and the catastrophic assumption he made, that a woman without her vision was a woman without her power. Research on financial abuse in relationships where one partner has a disability consistently shows that abusers exploit the caregiving role as a cover, portraying control as devotion, making the abuse extraordinarily difficult for outsiders to detect. Matthew Reeves understood this instinctively. He had watched Olivia navigate a darkened world, and he decided it was his opportunity. What Matthew did not understand, what he never once considered, is that Olivia had spent 30 years in classrooms full of children who thought they could get away with things when her back was turned. She had spent 3 decades learning to read people without relying entirely on what she could see. She knew the weight of a lie before it finished forming. And from the moment she understood what Matthew was doing, she did not confront him. She did not cry. She did not leave. She started collecting. And the question that is going to follow you through every minute of this story is not whether Olivia had the strength to fight back. It is this: how far had Matthew already gone by the time she started? And was there anything left to save? There are 3 questions at the center of this story, and I want to lay them out clearly before we go any further, because each one is going to pull you in a different direction, and by the time this is over, the answers are going to hit harder than you expect. The first question is this: what exactly did Matthew Reeves do in the months after Olivia lost her sight? And how far was he willing to go? Because what the financial records eventually showed was not impulsive. It was not reckless. It was methodical. It was the kind of financial dismantling that takes planning, patience, and a person who has been waiting for the right moment for a very long time. The evidence would later suggest that Matthew did not stumble into betrayal. He walked toward it deliberately, one transaction at a time. The second question is the one that kept investigators up at night. How does a woman who is legally blind, a woman who cannot read a bank statement, cannot check a phone screen, cannot see who is walking through her own front door, how does that woman collect 214 hours of audio evidence without her husband ever suspecting a thing? The answer to that question is not simple technology. It is not luck. It is something far more deliberate, and it involves a young woman named Angel, Olivia's niece, and a decision the two of them made together in the quietest room in a house that had stopped feeling safe. We'll get to Angel. Her role in this story is larger than it first appears. The third question is the one nobody wanted to ask out loud, but the one that sat underneath everything once the recordings were reviewed. In one of those recordings, Matthew tells someone, and we will get to exactly who, that Olivia won't be an issue much longer. Those are his words. And the question the Fulton County investigators had to answer was whether that phrase described a divorce he was planning, a care facility he was researching, or something else entirely. Documentation on financial abuse against disabled partners shows that abusers frequently move from financial control toward total removal of the victim, whether through institutionalization, isolation, or legal maneuvering that strips the disabled partner of any remaining independence. Matthew Reeves had already begun that process. The only thing standing between him and the finish line was a USB drive and a woman who had decided to be very, very patient. What we know for certain is this. By January 2025, when Olivia's attorney filed the civil complaint in Fulton County Superior Court, The picture that emerged from the financial records was not the portrait of a devoted husband managing his wife's affairs during a medical crisis. It was the portrait of a man who had used a legal document, a durable power of attorney signed 12 days after Olivia's diagnosis, to systematically transfer the financial life she had spent 27 years building into accounts and entities she did not know existed. The house, the retirement fund, the joint investment accounts, all of it moved, all of it hidden, and Matthew had done it all while holding her hand at doctor's appointments, while cooking dinner, while sitting in the third pew at church on Sunday mornings like a man without a single secret in the world. But before we get to what Matthew took, we need to understand what he and Olivia built together. Because the only way to truly feel the weight of what was stolen is to first understand exactly what it was worth. Olivia Green was born in 1972 in Southwest Atlanta, the second of 4 children raised by a woman who worked double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital and a father who drove a city bus for 31 years. They were not wealthy, but they were steady. And steadiness, her mother told her, was worth more than money because money could leave, but a person's character stayed. Olivia carried that with her into everything she did. She graduated from Spelman College in 1994 with a degree in early childhood education, walked straight into a DeKalb County classroom, and never looked back. Over the next 3 decades, she moved from classroom teacher to instructional coach to assistant principal, eventually retiring in 2021 after 30 years in the same school system she had grown up admiring. Her colleagues described her the same way, over and over: precise, warm, and not a woman you could easily fool. Matthew Reeves grew up in College Park, just south of the city. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, and just enough to make you stop asking questions. He studied business at Morehouse, spent a few years in banking, and eventually moved into commercial real estate brokerage, where his personality was his greatest professional asset. He was the kind of man who remembered your birthday, who showed up at your mother's funeral, who made you feel, in every interaction, like you were the most important person in the room. He and Olivia met at a mutual friend's cookout in Decatur in the summer of 1998. She was 26. He was 27. She later told her sister that she knew within the first conversation that he was going to be important to her. She did not yet know in which direction. They married in June of 2000 at Cascade Road Baptist Church, a ceremony their friends still referenced years later as one of the most joyful they had ever attended. 200 guests, a live band, a reception that stretched past midnight. In the photographs from that day, Olivia is laughing in nearly every frame. Not posing, laughing. The kind of laugh that fills a room. They settled into a brick home in Cascade Heights, a neighborhood in southwest Atlanta with wide streets and mature oak trees, and the kind of quiet that makes a house feel like it was built specifically for you. They did not have children of their own, but their home was never empty. Olivia's niece Angel, the daughter of her younger brother, spent weekends there through most of her childhood. She called Olivia Auntie Liv and called Matthew Uncle Matt, and grew up understanding their house as a second home. From the outside, the marriage looked like what most people spend a lifetime trying to build. Matthew's business was doing well. Olivia's career was decorated and respected. They traveled. They gave to their church. They showed up for each other's families. But Olivia's closest friends, the ones who had known her since Spelman, who had sat with her through difficult seasons, would later say, when asked carefully, that there had always been something about the way Matthew managed the money. Not dramatically, nothing that announced itself. He had always been the one who handled the accounts, who managed the investments, who said things like, "Don't worry about that, I've got it," and said it in a tone that made asking again feel unnecessary. Olivia was not financially naive. She was an administrator who managed school budgets. But inside her own marriage, she had been slowly and quietly handed less and less visibility into their shared financial life. She trusted him, so she did not push. Then came October 14th, 2023. Olivia woke up on a Tuesday morning and the left side of her world was simply gone. Not blurry, not dark around the edges. Gone. She sat up in bed, closed her right eye, and saw nothing on the left. She drove herself to her ophthalmologist. She later said she did not want to frighten Matthew before she knew what she was dealing with, and by that afternoon, she was sitting in a specialist's office at Emory being told that she had experienced a non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy event, A sudden loss of blood flow to the optic nerve. Permanent. The right eye was at elevated risk. Over the following 8 weeks, the vision in her right eye deteriorated as well. By January 2024, Olivia Reeves was legally blind. She was 51 years old, and the life she had known, every face, every sunrise, every small visual comfort she had never thought to be grateful for, had been quietly rearranged without warning. Matthew was there for all of it. He held her hand in the waiting rooms. He spoke to the doctors. He drove her home from every appointment, walked her to the door, made sure she was settled. Their church community rallied around them. Friends brought food. People called to check in and reported back that Matthew was extraordinary, patient, attentive, a rock. And he was, for approximately 12 days. Because on the 26th of January, 2024, 12 days after Olivia received her formal legal blindness classification, Matthew Reeves placed a document in front of his wife and guided her hand to the signature line. He told her it was paperwork the doctors had recommended. A formality, he said. Something to make managing things easier while she adjusted. Olivia signed it. She would not learn until 11 months later that what she had signed was a durable power of attorney granting Matthew Reeves full legal authority over every financial account, every asset, and every transaction in her name. Advocates who work with disabled survivors of financial abuse consistently document this pattern. The power of attorney, a legal tool designed to protect a vulnerable person, is instead obtained during a window of acute medical and emotional crisis, and then used to systematically strip the victim of the very financial independence that would have allowed them to leave. Olivia had signed the document that would be used to take everything she had spent a lifetime building, and Matthew had done it in a tone so calm, so practiced, so wrapped in the language of love and care, that it did not even register as a moment to remember. But Angel remembered it, because Angel had been in the kitchen that afternoon. She had not seen the document, but she had heard the way Matthew said the word formality, and something about the way he said it made her set down her glass and stand very still. Within 72 hours of Olivia's blindness classification becoming official, Matthew Reeves made 3 phone calls. Not to family, not to their pastor, not to a doctor. And the question that would eventually crack this entire case wide open was a simple one. Who, exactly, was on the other end of those calls? The first call Matthew made was to a woman named Priscilla. She was 38 years old, a commercial property manager he had worked alongside for nearly 4 years. The nature of their relationship at that point is something Matthew's attorney would later characterize as professional. The phone records, the credit card statements, and eventually the recordings would characterize it very differently. The second call was to his brother, a man who lived in Stone Mountain and who would later be subpoenaed as part of the civil proceeding. The third call was to a financial services company, not the one that managed the accounts he and Olivia held jointly, but a separate institution. An institution Olivia had never heard of. These 3 calls, made within 72 hours of her diagnosis being formalized, were the foundation of everything that came after. They were the moment Matthew Reeves stopped performing grief and started executing a plan. In the weeks that followed, Matthew's behavior settled into a rhythm that looked, from every external angle, like devotion. He hired a home health aide to assist Olivia during the hours he was at work. He accompanied her to every medical appointment and spoke to every specialist with the attentiveness of a man who had made his wife his entire world. He answered questions on her behalf before she could finish forming them. He updated their friends and church community with regular progress reports. He organized her medications. He configured her phone with accessibility features. He was present, consistent, and visibly exhausted in the way that caregiving partners are, and people noticed, and people commented, and people told Matthew Reeves what a good man he was. He thanked them graciously every time. He had learned, somewhere along the way, that the best cover a person can have is a reputation built in public while the real work happens in private. The real work began in February 2024. Using the durable power of attorney Olivia had signed, Matthew contacted the financial institution that held their primary joint retirement account, a fund Olivia had contributed to for 27 years of teaching, a fund that had grown to approximately $340,000. He did not make a single large withdrawal that would trigger an immediate alert. He moved the money in structured transfers, spread across several weeks, routed into an LLC he had registered in Georgia under a name that bore no obvious connection to either of them. The LLC had been formed 3 weeks before Olivia's diagnosis. That detail, 3 weeks before, would become one of the most significant points of contention in the civil proceeding. Matthew's attorney argued it was coincidental. The forensic accountant Olivia's legal team hired argued it was preparation. By April of 2024, the retirement account was effectively emptied. By June, Matthew had used the power of attorney to redirect the proceeds from the closing of a commercial property deal, a transaction Olivia had been a co-investor on, into the same LLC. By August, he had initiated the process of transferring the deed to their Cascade Heights home into the LLC as well. The house Olivia had lived in for 22 years. The house where she and Matthew had hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties and quiet Sunday mornings. The house she navigated by memory now. Every doorway, every step, every corner known to her hands and feet, in the way that a home becomes known when your eyes can no longer do the mapping. Matthew was transferring it out from under her feet, and she was still sleeping in it every night, still passing him the coffee every morning, still saying good night in the dark. And then there was Priscilla. By the spring of 2024, Matthew and Priscilla were no longer keeping the relationship contained to phone calls. They were seen together at a restaurant in Buckhead on a Wednesday evening in March, a place Matthew and Olivia had gone for their anniversary 3 years in a row. They took a weekend trip to Savannah in April, charged to a credit card on the joint account Olivia still believed was hers to share. A second trip in June. A hotel in Midtown Atlanta in July that appeared on a statement as a vague merchant name Olivia would not have recognized even if she could have read it. Matthew was not careless about these things in the way that guilty people sometimes are. He was not leaving receipts in jacket pockets or coming home with unfamiliar marks. He was careless in a different way. He was careless because he had decided, on some fundamental level, that Olivia could not see and therefore could not know. That assumption was the single greatest miscalculation of his life. Because Olivia could smell. She could hear. She could feel the particular weight of a conversation that has been edited before it reaches you. She noticed that Matthew's phone, which had never had a passcode in 18 years of marriage, now required one. She noticed that he took certain calls in the garage. She noticed that the home aide he had hired, a perfectly kind woman named Denise, seemed to have been instructed, subtly, to keep Olivia comfortable and occupied rather than mobile and engaged. She noticed that when she asked Matthew about specific accounts, his answers were always technically responsive and entirely uninformative. She noticed all of it, and she said nothing. She filed every observation in the careful, methodical part of her mind that 30 years of running a school building had built, the part that knew the difference between a problem that needs to be addressed immediately and a problem that needs to be fully understood before you move. She was not ready to move yet, but she was getting there. It was a conversation she overheard in late August that accelerated the timeline. Matthew was in the master bathroom with the door partially closed, speaking in the low, clipped tone he used when he believed the words mattered and the walls did not. Olivia was sitting in the reading chair 4 feet away, a chair she had not told Matthew she had repositioned 3 weeks earlier specifically because the acoustics near the east wall were clearer. She heard his voice. She heard the word facility. She heard him say the phrase when the time is right. She heard him say, in a voice she had known for 26 years, she won't be an issue much longer. She sat completely still. She kept her breathing even. And when Matthew came out of the bathroom and asked her if she wanted dinner, she said yes, and asked him how his day had been, and listened to him talk about nothing for 45 minutes over a meal she could not taste. Financial abuse specialists note that the moment a disabled partner becomes aware of the exploitation, the most dangerous thing they can do is reveal that awareness, because abusers who sense discovery frequently accelerate their plans, sometimes moving from financial removal to physical or institutional removal of the victim. Olivia understood this without being told. She had been in rooms with dangerous situations before. She knew that the person who speaks first does not always win. She picked up her phone that night, navigated to her contacts using the accessibility features Matthew had configured for her, the same features he had set up believing they made her more dependent on him, and she called Angel. The call lasted 11 minutes. Olivia told Angel 3 things. She told her what she had heard. She told her what she suspected about the accounts. And then she told Angel the one thing she needed her to bring the next time she came over. Something small, Something that could sit on a bookshelf without drawing any attention. Something that listened. Angel Reeves was 28 years old and worked as a patient services coordinator at a hospital in Midtown Atlanta. She was precise in the way that people who work in healthcare administration are precise, accustomed to documentation, accustomed to process, accustomed to understanding that the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one is almost always found in the details that someone chose to write down. When Olivia called her that night in late August, Angel did not panic. She asked 3 questions, listened to the answers, and told her aunt she would be there on Thursday. Matthew was at a property showing every Thursday between 10 and 2. Angel knew his schedule better than he realized. She had been paying attention to it for months. Not because she suspected anything specific, but because something about the way Matthew moved through that house had been making her uncomfortable since February, and Angel had learned, growing up around Olivia, that discomfort is information. She arrived on a Thursday morning with 2 things, a small smart speaker device, the kind that sits unobtrusively on a shelf and responds to voice commands, and a woman named Carol Simmons, who she introduced to Denise the home aide as a wellness visitor from the hospital's community outreach program. Carol was not from community outreach. Carol was a financial patient advocate, a role that exists in a small number of hospital systems specifically to help patients with disabilities navigate financial decisions they may be struggling to manage independently. Angel had spent 2 weeks locating her. Carol sat with Olivia at the kitchen table for 90 minutes while Angel installed the smart speaker in the living room and a second device, identical, in the master bedroom, placed on the upper shelf of the bookcase beside the window, behind a framed photograph of Olivia and Matthew at a beach in Hilton Head from the summer of 2019. Georgia is a one-party consent state, meaning that as long as one person present in or party to a conversation consents to a recording, the recording is legal. Olivia was the consenting party. The devices were registered in her name, on an account Angel set up on Olivia's phone using Olivia's credentials. Everything was documented. Everything was clean. Carol, meanwhile, was doing something that would become equally important to the case. She was helping Olivia formally request account statements, not through Matthew, not through the power of attorney, but directly, in Olivia's own name, because a durable power of attorney grants an agent the authority to act on behalf of a principal, but it does not extinguish the principal's own legal standing to access information about accounts she is party to. Elder law attorneys who specialize in power of attorney abuse consistently make this point. If you granted someone power of attorney and still have mental capacity, you retain the right to demand a full accounting of every transaction the agent conducted on your behalf. Matthew had either not known this, or had calculated that Olivia would never think to ask. Either way, he had not anticipated Carol Simmons sitting at his kitchen table on a Thursday morning, helping his wife formally request 30 months of statements across 6 accounts in Olivia's name. By the time Matthew came home at 2:15, Carol was gone, the speaker was on the shelf, and Olivia was sitting in the living room listening to an audiobook with her earbuds in. Matthew kissed her on the forehead. She smiled and asked about the showing. He told her it had gone well. The statements arrived over the following 3 weeks, some electronically, read to Olivia through her phone's screen reader, some in large print paper format, that Angel came over to review with her. What they showed took both women a long time to fully absorb, not because it was complicated, but because the scale of it required them to keep going back to the numbers to confirm they were reading them correctly. The primary retirement account, which had held $340,000 in January 2024, showed a current balance of $4,200. The joint investment account they had maintained since 2009 had been closed entirely in March, its balance of $87,000 transferred to an institution neither of them recognized. 2 certificates of deposit Olivia had opened independently during her teaching years, accounts Matthew's name was not on, but over which he had claimed authority using the power of attorney, had been liquidated in April and June respectively. Angel laid the statements out on the kitchen table in order by date, and sat quietly for a moment before she said anything. What she said was, "We need a lawyer." And then she said, "We need to keep the devices running." Over the next 90 days, the smart speakers collected continuously. Matthew spoke freely in that house, on the phone in the living room, in conversation in the bedroom, occasionally in what appeared to be video calls conducted in the study with the door pulled to but not latched. The devices captured a call between Matthew and his brother in which Matthew described Olivia's condition as getting worse, a characterization that her medical records did not support, and that investigators later concluded was Matthew constructing a narrative he would use to justify moving her into a memory care facility, despite the fact that Olivia had no cognitive impairment of any kind. The devices captured multiple calls between Matthew and Priscilla in which the two of them discussed timelines. In one call, Priscilla asked when they could move forward properly. Matthew said he needed a few more months to get everything in order. He used that phrase, get everything in order, 4 times across the recordings. Each time, it referred to money. Financial exploitation cases involving power of attorney abuse show a consistent pattern. The exploitation is rarely impulsive, but rather unfolds in deliberate phases, first gaining legal authority, then liquidating assets, then moving toward the permanent removal or legal neutralization of the victim. And then there was the recording from October 9, 2024. Matthew was on the phone in the bedroom at 11:40 in the evening, believing Olivia was asleep. The device on the bookshelf captured the entire call. He was speaking to someone, the identity of whom would not be confirmed until the civil discovery process, and the conversation lasted 22 minutes. In it, Matthew discussed the status of the LLC, the property transfer, and what he described as a timeline for the next step. The person on the other end asked whether Olivia was going to be a problem. Matthew paused. The recording captured the pause clearly, 3 seconds of silence. And then he said, "She can make out shapes now. The right eye has some light coming back." And then, after another pause, he said, "It doesn't matter. By the time anyone figures it out, everything will already be done." Olivia was not asleep. She was in the reading chair on the other side of the wall, in the dark, completely still, listening to the same recording she would later hear replayed in a Fulton County courtroom. She had her phone in her hand. She navigated, without a sound, to her attorney's name in her contacts. She typed 4 words into a message and hit send. The message said, "I think we're ready." By November 2024, Olivia's legal team, a civil litigation attorney named Patricia Holbrook and a forensic financial specialist brought in to audit the LLC, had built a case document that ran to 240 pages. The financial trail was clear. The recordings were legally obtained and admissible under Georgia's one-party consent statute. The power of attorney, Holbrook argued, had been obtained through undue influence, presented to a woman 12 days into a life-altering medical diagnosis, during a period of acute psychological and neurological crisis, without independent legal counsel, without a waiting period, and without any explanation of what the document actually authorized. Legal advocates note that abusers who obtain power of attorney from a newly disabled partner during the first weeks of a diagnosis are deliberately exploiting the window when the victim is least equipped, medically, emotionally, and psychologically, to evaluate what they are agreeing to. The argument was not that Olivia lacked legal capacity. The argument was that Matthew had engineered the circumstances to ensure she could not exercise it meaningfully. Patricia Holbrook filed the civil complaint in Fulton County Superior Court on January 14, 2025. The filing named Matthew Reeves, the LLC, and 2 financial institutions as defendants. It was 412 pages long, including exhibits. Matthew received his copy at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. His attorney later said that when Matthew called him, his voice was completely flat. Not panicked, not angry, flat, which, the attorney would later reflect, told him everything he needed to know about what kind of man he was dealing with. What happened next in that courtroom, what Olivia did when she took the stand, and what the medical records revealed about what Matthew had known and when he had known it, would stop everyone in that room cold. Because the detail that unraveled Matthew Reeves's entire defense was not in the financial records. It was not in the recordings. It was in a set of medical notes that Matthew himself had sat in the room while a doctor dictated. And it turned out that the biggest mistake Matthew Reeves ever made was not the money. It was attending every single one of his wife's appointments. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a courtroom when something shifts. Not the silence of boredom or procedure, but the silence of a room full of people who have just understood something at the same time and do not yet know what to do with it. The Fulton County Superior Court heard that silence on a Wednesday morning in March 2025, When Patricia Holbrook introduced into evidence a set of clinical notes from Olivia's ophthalmologist, Dr. Sandra Moss of the Emory Eye Center. The notes were from 2 follow-up appointments, one in March 2024 and one in May 2024. They were written in the measured, precise language that medical documentation requires. But what they said, stripped of the clinical framing, was this: Olivia Reeves was getting some of her vision back. Not fully, not dramatically, but measurably. The right eye, which had continued to deteriorate through January, had shown unexpected stabilization by March. By May, Dr. Moss had documented what she described as limited but meaningful light and contrast perception returning in a localized visual field. The prognosis, she noted, had shifted from total blindness to a condition that warranted continued monitoring and cautious optimism. She had communicated this to her patient at both appointments. She had communicated it to both people in the room. Matthew Reeves had been present at both appointments. He had sat in the chair beside Olivia and listened to a doctor tell his wife that her sight was partially returning. And then he had driven her home and continued moving her money. Matthew's attorney argued, in response, that Matthew had not fully understood the clinical language, that the nuances of ophthalmological prognosis were not something a layperson could be expected to absorb accurately in a medical appointment. It was a reasonable argument, constructed carefully, and it might have held some weight if the recordings had not existed. Because on October 9, 2024, at 11:40 in the evening, Matthew Reeves had told someone on the phone, in plain and unambiguous English, that Olivia could make out shapes, that the right eye had some light coming back. He had not used clinical language. He had used the language of a man who understood exactly what was happening to his wife's vision and had decided it was not going to change his plans. The recordings did not just contradict his attorney's argument. They dismantled it entirely. The courtroom was quiet for a long moment after Holbrook played that section of the audio. Matthew sat at the defense table with his hands folded in front of him, looking at a fixed point somewhere between the table and the floor. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Matthew did not move. The forensic financial audit, presented by the specialist Holbrook had retained, laid out the full scope of what had been moved and where it had gone. The primary retirement account, 27 years of Olivia's teaching career compressed into a number that had taken most of her professional life to build, had been reduced from $340,000 to $4,200 over 11 months. The joint investment account, $87,000, was gone. 2 independent certificates of deposit totaling $61,000 had been liquidated. The proceeds from the commercial property co-investment, $94,000 after fees, had been redirected into the LLC. The LLC itself, when its accounts were frozen and audited, held $318,000 in liquid assets and was listed as the sole owner of a property in Cascade Heights, Atlanta, the home Olivia had lived in for 22 years, the home she still lived in at the time of the filing. The total financial exposure identified in the audit was $582,000. Legal experts who specialize in power of attorney fraud note that this kind of exploitation, using a legally obtained authority to liquidate a disabled partner's lifetime assets and transfer them into separate entities, constitutes one of the most complete forms of financial destruction one person can inflict on another, precisely because it uses the victim's own trust as the instrument of their ruin. Priscilla was subpoenaed and testified in the civil proceeding in late February, 3 weeks before the March hearing at which the medical records were introduced. She confirmed the relationship with Matthew. She confirmed the timeline, that the two of them had been involved well before Olivia's diagnosis, a detail that reframed the entire narrative of Matthew's supposed devotion during Olivia's medical crisis. She confirmed the Savannah trips, the Buckhead dinners, the calls. She denied any knowledge of the financial scheme, stating under oath that she had believed Matthew when he told her he and Olivia were in the process of separating. She said she had not known about the power of attorney. She said she had not known about the LLC. Whether the court found her credible on those specific points was a matter her own attorney declined to discuss with reporters afterward. What her testimony established without ambiguity was that Matthew Reeves had been living a second life, not impulsively, not as a moment of weakness, but as a sustained and deliberate parallel existence that predated his wife's disability and accelerated the moment it arrived. Then came the moment that nobody in that courtroom forgot. Olivia Reeves took the stand. She was composed in the particular way that people are composed when they have already done their grieving privately and have nothing left to perform for an audience. She answered Patricia Holbrook's questions in a clear, even voice. She walked through the signing of the power of attorney, the word formality, the guided hand, the absence of any explanation of what the document actually authorized. She described overhearing the phone call in August. She described calling Angel. She described the 11 months that followed, sitting across from Matthew at dinner every night, passing him coffee every morning, saying goodnight in a house she was quietly, methodically, legally dismantling his claim to. And then Holbrook asked her one final question. She asked Olivia when she had first become aware that some of her vision was returning. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she had become aware of changes in her right eye sometime in the late spring of 2024. Holbrook asked her why she had not told Matthew. Olivia looked in the direction of the defense table, not quite at Matthew, but close enough that everyone in the room understood exactly who she was addressing, and she said, "Because I needed him to keep talking." The silence that followed lasted for seconds. A journalist in the press gallery later wrote that it was the loudest 4 seconds she had ever experienced in a courtroom. Matthew's attorney filed a motion to suppress the recordings 3 days after Olivia's testimony, arguing that the smart speaker installation constituted an invasion of privacy. The motion was denied. Georgia's one-party consent statute was unambiguous, and Olivia had been in or party to every recorded conversation in her own home. The motion's denial cleared the path for the civil verdict, but before the verdict came down, Matthew Reeves made a decision that told the rest of the story more clearly than any evidence could. 12 days before the civil verdict was handed down, Matthew Reeves filed for divorce. And simultaneously, in a move that his own attorney would later describe in a deposition as one he had advised strongly against, Matthew filed a counterclaim. He was not counterclaiming for assets. He was not counterclaiming for the house. He was claiming that Olivia, the woman who had lost her sight in his care, the woman he had stripped of her retirement and her home, had violated his privacy. He was suing her. And what that decision revealed about the character of Matthew Reeves was something no recording could have captured on its own. There is a legal term that attorneys use when a court determines that a document was never valid to begin with. Not voidable, not merely flawed, but void from the moment it was created, as though it had never existed at all. The term is void ab initio. It is Latin, and it is cold, and it is precise. And when Judge Renee Callaway of the Fulton County Superior Court used it in her written ruling on March 31, 2025, to describe the durable power of attorney Matthew Reeves had placed in front of his wife 12 days after her diagnosis, it meant one specific and irreversible thing. Everything Matthew had done using that document, every transfer, every liquidation, every deed reassignment, every transaction conducted under the authority it had purportedly granted him, had been done without legal foundation. The power of attorney had been obtained through undue influence, the court found, during a period of acute medical and psychological vulnerability, without independent counsel, without meaningful explanation, and in circumstances that the court described as deliberately engineered to prevent the principle from exercising informed consent. Void ab initio, as if it had never been signed, as if the pen had never touched the paper, as if Matthew had never had the authority he had spent 11 months exercising. The LLC was dissolved by court order within 30 days of the ruling. The Cascade Heights property was restored to Olivia's sole ownership. The court ordered restitution of $318,000. The liquid assets identified in the LLC at the time it was frozen, with the remaining funds still under forensic review, pending the outcome of a parallel investigation that had been opened by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office on referral from the civil court. That investigation, as of early 2026, remained active and ongoing. Matthew's attorney released a brief statement saying his client intended to appeal certain findings of the civil ruling. No appeal had been filed at the time this story was reported. The divorce Matthew had filed 12 days before the verdict was proceeding through the courts on a separate track, complicated significantly by the civil ruling's findings about the LLC and the property, both of which were now restored to Olivia, which meant Matthew's divorce filing had arrived, with remarkable timing, at a moment when he had considerably less to negotiate with than he had believed. And then there was the counterclaim. The lawsuit Matthew filed against Olivia. The claim that her use of the smart speaker devices constituted an invasion of his privacy and entitled him to damages. It was dismissed. It took 31 days. The dismissal was not surprising to anyone who understood Georgia's one-party consent statute, which is unambiguous on the question of whether a homeowner may record conversations in her own residence when she is a party to or present in those conversations. What was surprising, or perhaps not surprising at all, depending on how clearly you had been seeing Matthew Reeves throughout this story, was that he filed it in the first place. That with a forensic audit documenting $582,000 in financial destruction, with recordings capturing his own voice describing his wife's returning vision as an irrelevance, with a civil court having just voided the legal instrument at the center of everything he had done, Matthew Reeves's instinct was to make Olivia the defendant. To find, in the wreckage of what he had built and what he had stolen and what he had lost, a way to position himself as the injured party. Legal scholars who study domestic abuse litigation note that this pattern, the abuser weaponizing the legal system against the victim even after exposure, is not anomalous but characteristic, representing a continuation of the control dynamic through whatever institutional mechanisms remain available. The counterclaim was not a legal strategy. It was a personality, and the court disposed of it accordingly. Olivia moved back into the Cascade Heights home on April 8, 2025. She had never technically left. The house had remained her residence throughout the civil proceedings. But there is a difference between living somewhere and inhabiting it. And for the 16 months between her diagnosis and the civil ruling, she had been living in that house in a state of suspended purposefulness, moving through it carefully, strategically, collecting what she needed and revealing nothing. When the ruling came down and the legal cloud over the property lifted, something shifted. She had the bedroom she had shared with Matthew for 22 years repainted, a deep, warm terracotta that she chose not because she could see it clearly, but because her sister described it to her and said it sounded like her. She replaced the furniture in that room with pieces chosen for how they felt and where they sat in space. She moved her reading chair to the window. She bought floor lamps for every corner, full-spectrum bulbs, maximum brightness, because her right eye, with its returning light and contrast perception, responded to warmth, and she had decided that every room she lived in from that point forward was going to be as full of light as she could make it. Angel came over on the Saturday after Olivia moved back in fully. She brought food and her youngest nephew and stayed most of the day. At one point in the afternoon, she asked Olivia what she wanted to do with the devices, the smart speakers, still on their shelves, still registered in Olivia's name. Olivia said to leave them. Not because she needed them anymore, but because she had grown accustomed to the particular kind of security that comes from knowing that what happens in your home is witnessed. She said she thought everyone should feel that way in their own house. Angel said she agreed. They sat together in the living room with the windows open and the Atlanta afternoon coming through the curtains, and they did not talk about Matthew for the rest of the day. What this story exposes goes beyond one marriage and one man's choices. According to the National Adult Protective Services Association, only 1 in 44 cases of financial exploitation against disabled adults is ever reported to law enforcement, meaning that for every Olivia Reeves who finds her way to a courtroom, there are 43 others still sitting at dinner tables across this country, passing the bread, saying good night in the dark, with no Angel to call and no Carol Simmons to sit across from them at a kitchen table and tell them what they are, still entitled to know. The durable power of attorney is a legal instrument designed with the best of intentions to protect people in their most vulnerable moments from a world that can be difficult to navigate alone. In the wrong hands, in a marriage where love has curdled into calculation, it becomes the most efficient tool of financial destruction that the law has ever accidentally made available. A signature on a piece of paper, obtained during the 12 days after a woman lost her sight, handed one man total legal authority over everything she had spent a lifetime building. And the law, for 11 months, let him use it. Olivia Reeves did not survive this story by being exceptional. She survived it by paying attention, by treating her own home like a classroom where something important was happening that she needed to understand fully before she responded. She survived it because she had a niece who knew how to be still and deliberate when everything in her wanted to move fast. She survived it because a financial advocate sat at her kitchen table on a Thursday morning and told her something nobody had thought to tell her before, that the document she had signed had taken her authority, but not her rights. And she survived it because for 90 days she sat across from a man she had loved for 26 years and gave him absolutely no reason to think that the woman he believed he had left in the dark was, in fact, the only person in that house who could see clearly. The criminal investigation is ongoing. The appeal Matthew's attorney referenced has not been filed. The divorce is proceeding. And Olivia, as of this reporting in early 2026, is receiving low-vision rehabilitation therapy 3 mornings a week at a clinic in Decatur, the same part of Atlanta where she and Matthew met at a cookout in the summer of 1998. She told her therapist recently that she is learning to trust what she can see again, not just with her eyes. Her therapist wrote that down. Matthew Reeves sat in that doctor's office and heard his wife's vision was returning. He went home, made dinner, and kept moving her money. So I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to think about this carefully before you answer in the comments below. How many of us have handed someone every key to our life, every account, every password, every financial decision, not because we had to, but because we love them enough to stop checking? And what would it take for you to realize that the person holding those keys had changed the locks? If you have made it to this moment in this story, I want you to know something. You did not stay because this was easy to watch. You stayed because something in this story felt true to you. True in the way that certain stories are true, not just as facts, but as warnings, as mirrors, as the kind of narrative that makes you sit very still and think about your own life, and your own home, and your own front door, and who has the key to it. That is not an accident. That is what stories like Olivia's are for. They are not here to shock you and release you. They are here to leave something behind. And if what this story leaves behind in you is a single conversation, with a sister, with a daughter, with a friend you have been meaning to call, about what your name is on, about what you have signed, about who has authority over what you have spent a lifetime building, then Olivia's story has done something that no courtroom ruling and no forensic audit ever could. It has traveled forward in time and made someone safer. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to hear from you. Because this community is one of the things that makes telling these stories feel worthwhile. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from, your city, your state, wherever you are sitting with this story tonight. We read every single comment on this channel. We want to know who is in this room with us. And if this is your first time here, if this story found you somehow, through a recommendation or a search or a friend who sent you the link and said you have to watch this, then welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now so you are here for what comes next, because what comes next is going to find you the same way this one did, and you do not want to come in late. Now I want to ask you something specific about this story, and I want your honest answer in the comments below. At what moment did you know that Olivia was not just surviving, that she was building something? Was it when Angel walked in with the device? Was it when you heard that Olivia had repositioned the reading chair specifically for the acoustics? Was it the moment she said I needed him to keep talking? Drop the timestamp. Tell us the exact moment this story changed for you, because I have a feeling it is going to be different for every single person watching, and I want to see where it lands. There is no wrong answer. There is only the moment the story shifted from something that was happening to Olivia into something Olivia was doing. Tell me when you felt that shift. And for those of you who have been part of this community for a while, who have watched the stories on this channel about coercive control, about financial abuse dressed up as devotion, about the particular way that certain people weaponize love as a mechanism of access, you already know that these stories do not exist in isolation. They exist in a pattern, and the pattern has a logic to it that becomes clearer the more of these stories you sit with. Olivia Reeves is not an outlier. She is a data point in a landscape of women who signed something they did not fully understand, in a moment when they were too tired or too frightened or too trusting to read the fine print. The difference between Olivia and the women who never make it to a courtroom is not strength. It is proximity. Proximity to one person who knew what questions to ask and was not afraid to ask them quietly. That person, in Olivia's case, was Angel. In your life, that person might be you. For someone you know, that person might need to be you. Hold on to that. Next week, we are going into a story that I have been sitting with for months, waiting until the reporting was complete and the details could be told in full. It is the story of a woman named Diane, who discovered 19 years into her marriage that the name on her mortgage, her bank accounts, her social security records, and her children's school enrollment forms was not hers. It belonged to a woman her husband had invented. A complete identity, constructed from nothing, sustained for 2 decades, and tied to a second family living in Birmingham, Alabama, that Diane did not know existed. The name her husband had given her when they married, the name she had used to build every piece of her adult life, had never been legally registered to her at all. Everything she believed she owned, she did not. Everything she believed she was, on paper, she wasn't. We're going to walk through every detail of how it happened, how she found out, and what the law did and did not do for her when she tried to reclaim a life that had been built on someone else's fiction. That story drops next week. Make sure you are subscribed and the notification bell is on, because this is one you are going to want from the beginning. Olivia Reeves is home. The lights are on, and she is learning, 3 mornings a week in a clinic indicator, to trust what she can see. We could all stand to learn a little of that. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next one.